Me again. So I want to talk a little bit more about education. And what is the purpose of a university education? Why do we aspire to get one? I recently came across a discussion on Facebook where a group of young Kenyans were lamenting about the fact that many of them are unable to find jobs. The initial discussion point was in reaction to a post about a young engineering graduate who had started up a tailoring business because he had been waiting for about a year to find employment, particularly in a corporate organization. The discussants were outraged that the young graduate had to settle for inferior work because there are no jobs. So started a debate about the government's inability to provide jobs or an enabling environment for graduates to find employment. The thrust of the debate being that entrepreneurship is actually a poor substitute for employment. So the discussion made me wonder about the whole point of a university education, indeed any education. My counterpoint was that university education's primary purpose is to arm one with knowledge to be used for innovation and creativity, and not necessarily to find you employment. In general, when we think about the role of education, especially in Africa, we see it as a pathway to a better life. And so many of us want to be educated to get that path. The path being the ability to find a job after obtaining a university degree. What we do not always recognize is that the path is not as it seems. The simple fact is, globally, there will never be enough jobs to employ all youth who graduate from university, and it is particularly daunting in Africa. And even if it were possible to do so, most jobs would be below the competency of the graduates, or their interest, or maybe they would be hopelessly underemployed. So let me use myself as an example. I graduated with a double major in international relations and French, with a view to giving service to my country as a diplomat. I had it all planned. I was going to join at entry level and work my way up to being an ambassador. Instead, my government employed me as a personnel officer in the Ministry of Livestock Development. Go figure. I was floored, especially because I was interviewed for the Foreign Service. And I initially refused to take the job, but was persuaded that it was easier to get into the system and to get to where I wanted to be. So for 1.5 years, I stuck it out, trying at every turn to get where I felt my talents would be best utilized. And in the meantime, I also took on additional learning. I had diplomas in personnel management because that came with a job. And I also did business, French, and marketing. But in my day-to-day work, I was hopelessly underutilized. And eventually I left for the private sector to a marketing job with an international advertising agency. So my additional courses had actually paid off. So as I continued to follow the debate on the young engineer turned tailorpreneur, I pondered on what I think an education is good for. Is it supposed to help one achieve employment or personal development? And whose responsibility is it to make sure that one makes the best of the education they receive? I would propose that the best thing an education can do for you is open your mind to endless possibility, curiosity, new ideas, help you solve problems, critically analyze, and a whole host of other things. For today's discussions, therefore, I'd like to talk a little bit about innovation, enterprise, and creativity, which could all mean the same thing, and are interchangeable in many ways, but they can also be separate and distinct benefits of a university education. The next Einstein will be an African. How about that? As audacious a statement, proclamation as can only be made by the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, which recognizes that Africans need to be at the forefront of new technologies and research to solve our problems and meet our needs. There is no arguing against the fact that Africa needs locally grown innovators. African countries need to own their means of production and process in order to meet their strategic development goals. This is where higher education plays a significant role in empowering youth to boldly take on the challenges around them and seek new ideas to address them. Equally important is how well they are educated to take on this challenge. And by this, I don't mean how many degrees they have or which prestigious institutions they attend. No, what I am suggesting is a creation of lasting, meaningful educational transformation, which could include blended learning in interdisciplinary learning methods, entrepreneurship, and design thinking modules introduced in every course, so the final student end product is market ready for entrepreneurship or employment. Reducing poverty in Africa will thus depend on how well its youth are educated. So along comes the African Leadership Academy, an institution that embraced this concept at pre-university level by starting to inculcate the notion of enterprise in young Africans. The institution proudly and unashamedly introduced an African Studies program buttressed by a core international curriculum. At the heart is training young Africans in leadership and entrepreneurship. Students have to undertake entrepreneurial activities during their course of study, which are aimed at tackling local, regional, or Pan-African problems. By the time the students are transitioning to university, they have learned to work in teams. They have an understanding of African issues, and most importantly, they are entrepreneurial. My point here is that embedding enterprise into curricula will foster critical thinking in seeking economic solutions instead of thinking that engaging in enterprise is a poor substitute for getting a job. And where then does creativity factor in education? I'd suggest that in a system where innovation and enterprise are engaged, creativity is a natural output. New ideas flourish in abundance. Youth are not afraid to try new concepts, to fail and understand that it is part of learning, and to engage in working together. In an environment where students can express their creativity, they are more disciplined, focused, and geared to positive outcomes. African institutions of higher learning are consistently undergoing challenges with their student population, a symptom of the lack of creativity in how they engage with students. And students, we know, who identify with the institution have a true sense of belonging and will explore ways of solving problems which are not disruptive. They have a sense of citizenship that looks to dialogue, ethics, giving back, and academic excellence. So back to the young tailorpreneur. I applaud him for having taken the initiative to solve his personal unemployment and in creating jobs for others. More importantly, he took ownership of his education and was not fixated on having to find a job as an engineer, but used what he had learned to open up new opportunities to contribute to the economy. Back to me personally, I believe I am now an ambassador for the power of Africa and its youth, even as this is not the path I had envisioned at the start of my working life. I have embraced every opportunity to learn and believe that the university education I received was a springboard to my life experiences. And I leave you with this. How are you using or going to use your education? Thank you.